I open by asking that the thoughts of my mind and the meditation of my heart would be acceptable in the sight of my God. I also would like to open by thanking my friend Rhett Baird for offering me a word of encouragement on this morning, for reminding me that it is not the case that you have come here on this morning seeking to be entertained. I'm grateful for that reminder because on this morning I have to share with you what I imagine will be a difficult message. I'm going to open up to you a testimony that I intend to share about my experience with some words from the 14th chapter of the book of Romans. Chapter 14, verses 1 through 5 read, "Them that are weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that they may eat all things, and another who is weak eateth herbs. But let not them that eateth despise them that eateth not. And let not them which eateth not judge them that eateth. For God hath received them both. And who art thou that judges another person's servant? To their own master they standeth or falleth. Yea, they shall be holden up, for God is able to make them stand. One person esteemeth one day over another, and another esteemeth every day alike. But in all things let every person be fully persuaded in their own mind." Now, I chose this passage on this morning knowing full well that it may not be familiar to many of you. But my assumption in choosing it is that some of you would at least recognize a resonance with some statements closer to home. For in the pair of admonitions that are contained in the first and the last verse of this passage, I hear an echo not only of the third and fourth principles of Unitarian Universalism, but I also hear an echo of the mission statement of this very congregation. Them who are weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations, but rather in all things let every person be persuaded in their own mind. Friends, that for me is a translation into Bible of the communal commitments of Unitarian Universalism to support the free and individual search for spiritual truth and the provision of a community that could support such pursuit. Or, to put it in your own words, UUCA is a community of faith that encourages and supports individual spiritual questions out of which the community acts together for justice. This is the beacon which Unitarian Universalism shines in the sea of intolerance, and it is the beacon which drew me to this denomination as well as to the seminary I attended before arriving. But friends, I've come to bear an inconvenient witness to you on this morning and to relate unto you my testimony that beacons and refuges are not equivalent. For on the question of the relation between these two concepts to which we have previously presumed an equivalence, I'd like to submit that my experience has revealed that there is a subtle and yet highly significant difference. For my experience has revealed that a beacon can be true to itself and still be little more than an advertisement, serving to signal or to announce the nearby presence of some desirable existence. An illustration of this may be imagined in the plight of an inexperienced seaman who, seeking refuge from a storm, mistakes the first lighthouse as the location of the harbor he needs, only to discover upon running his ship aground that the lighthouse was only a beacon, and that the refuge or the safe harbor that he sought for himself and his crew was only indicated by the beacon. On the other hand, friends, a refuge is the safe harbor or welcome to which the beacon serves merely as the pointer, the place where the promise that is advertised by the beacon is fully and finally and actually delivered. In other words, a refuge is a beacon fulfilled, and it is the veritable coexistence of the two. But I hate to report to you, my friends, a sad truth about our superficial times, that being that it is few and far between that the two of these ideas are co-occurrent. My most recent encounter with a beacon posing as a refuge occurred during the most recent 3 years during which I attended and completed a master's in divinity at Vanderbilt. I was drawn to the Vanderbilt Divinity School because of its standing as a beacon of liberal religion, as well as for the commitment to inclusion which it signified with the hiring of an African-American lesbian dean. In fact, so bright was the shining of this beacon that I sold everything I had to pursue it. And so bright was the shining of this beacon that students came from all over the Southeast. And so bright was the shining of this beacon that Vandy became a haven for the queer and the questioning, all of us seeking a first-hand encounter with that elusive, beloved community that was promised. But friends, it is my sad duty to report to you and to speak on the behalf of many classmates that our hopes were dashed upon the shoreline of a beacon that called the spiritually wayward to a refuge that it did not contain within itself. For at the epicenter of what was heralded as the most inclusive seminary in the country, I encountered the most insidious and disheartening expression of intolerance into which I had ever come into contact. What I discovered, to my heart's dismay, is that there is such a thing as a liberal intolerance. And in fact, what I learned through experience is that the liberal version is even more destructive than the conservative. At least when you're dealing with conservatives, you know if you are marginalized that you are not welcome. But when you are being called into community with those who've been excluded, you assume that you shall encounter welcome. And in a community where tolerance is being extolled and demanded, you would think that you could count on it being practiced. But in the most queer-friendly religious environment into which I have ever stepped, I uncovered, operating directly within it, a form of reactive and painful intolerance. Friends, never did I imagine that I would find myself in league with fundamentalist Christians until I observed the persecution that they suffered at the hands of so many of my liberal colleagues. Those who professed a belief in Jesus Christ were treated as though they had personally persecuted their classmates. Their intelligence and their characters were constantly questioned until they were shamed into an abject silence. And so it was that in the curation of a religious space that was intentionally queer-friendly, an environment was produced that was inadvertently and unfortunately hostile to believers. In seeking a place of tolerance for their own sexually marginalized identities, the victims of religious exclusion unwittingly exacted their own version of intolerance, marginalizing a whole group of potential allies through generalization and the projection of blame. And it is as a result of those 3 disheartening years that I stand before you this morning with a warning. Before you go advertising yourselves as beloved community, make sure you have it to offer, lest you do further damage to those whose identities have rendered them starved for just such an encounter. For friends, the testimony that I've come to share with you this morning is one that is both difficult to speak and to hear. For while it is true that UUs have been historically averse to the practice of outward evangelism, my observation is that inwardly we have become quite comfortable with the contrary practice. We have, to our credit or detriment, avoided at all costs evangelizing our neighbors, but when those neighbors have crossed over our thresholds, we have shown ourselves quite comfortable with what I'll call devangelism. Now, from the name of this term, I'm assuming you can deduce what I'm intending by it, but I'll reveal my meaning by way of a pair of warnings that I received from UU ministers. By one current UU minister, I was strongly encouraged to guard closely my faith, for she instructed me, this denomination and its adherents will seek to secularize you. Additionally, by one retired UU minister, I was told with regard to this congregation that it was his lamentable observation during his time here that it was acceptable for a UU to be anything but a Christian. Sadly, my friends, I must report that in my short time, both of these warnings have proven prescient, as I have encountered what I'll refer to on this morning as theological microaggressions. For in addition to these warnings, I can report to having had personal encounters with this secularizing tendency, including having been personally asked to edit the manner in which I offer prayer. For after fielding the request that I lead the prayer for a group of this congregation, it was requested that I avoid making reference to God so as not to make the atheists uncomfortable. I wish at the time that I'd had the presence to ask what difference it would make to them. For to those who don't believe in God or prayer, my question is simply this: what is the harm in having prayer offered in your presence? If you are fully persuaded in your own mind, then why would you judge another faith servant? And to those who unsolicitedly and vehemently deny the truth of the Christian faith, I have the same question as I have for those who zealously seek to proselytize, namely, in all of your unsolicited opining, who is it that you are trying to convince? Now, in hindsight, I'm actually grateful that my Unitarian Christianity was hidden from view, for I've been able to serve as a sort of canary in the coal mine during my period of service to this community. I could not, as it were, hide my blackness, and so have endured less discomfort on that account. However, my identity as a Christian served as an unseen marker that permitted me access to the locker room talk. For I have borne witness firsthand to the disparagement to which Christianity and Christians are often subjected. And I have listened as the tradition, which has been the marrow for millions, has been subjected to mockery and mischaracterization. And so I'll close on this morning by asking a question that I encourage you to consider as you leave. For in response to the commitment that is weekly proclaimed, wherever you are from and whomever you love, you are welcome, my question is, does that seemingly open-ended welcome include those who love Jesus? For I almost entitled this message, Is Unitarian Universalism Possible? In homage to the rhetorical question asked by Vincent Harding, is America possible? With all my heart, I want to believe that the answer to both is yes. And with regard to the possibility of Unitarian Universalism, I have only this to say: them that are weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations, but in all things let every person be fully persuaded in their own minds. Friends, such a community and such a community alone would deserve the distinction of beloved, and it is only within such a community that the move could be made from beacon to refuge. And so I invite you, each of you, as you walk along your individual spiritual journeys, to be persuaded in your own minds. Let us move on to the spiritual maturity without which we cannot become beloved community. I thank you in advance for your commitment to this task and for the work that we will do to accomplish it. Amen.